This is a story of shadows, secrets, and forbidden fire, a narrative spun from the dark threads of international crime syndicates. This is the saga of Kofi Adebayo, the young African mafia boss whose empire stretches from the bustling markets of Lagos to the hidden ports of Accra, and how his path crossed with Ji-eun Kim, the enigmatic daughter of a Korean mafia overlord. This is not just a story of crime, it is a whirlwind of betrayal, bullets, and forbidden passion, where love becomes the deadliest weapon. The humid underbelly of Lagos smelled of diesel fumes, sizzling street food, and sweat. Motorcycles weave through puddles reflecting neon signs, vendors shouted over the chaos, and somewhere, a distant gunshot cracked through the night. In this city of survival, only the clever thrived. At the center of this storm stood Kofi Adebayo, 28 years old, a man already king of the West African underworld. Born in the slums of Ajagunle, he had learned the hard way that life offered no mercy. When he was 12, a rival gang sprayed his family home with bullets. Kofi survived by hiding beneath his mother's body, the smell of blood and dust seared into his memory forever. That night, he swore no one would ever make him hide again. From street runner to kingpin, Kofi's ascent had been relentless. By 22, he controlled diamond shipments out of Sierra Leone, codeine pipelines from India, and smuggled counterfeit luxury goods from Alaba Market. Every move was calculated, every ally and enemy counted. Around his neck hung a golden lion pendant, a symbol of his pride and ferocity. His tailored suits hid scars, knife marks and bullet grazes, but his smile, disarming and magnetic, was a weapon on its own. In the streets, he was a myth. In the ports, a lawless force. But Kofi knew ambition was a double-edged sword. One wrong move, one misjudged loyalty, and the city would swallow him whole. Thousands of miles away, in the neon-lit sprawl of Seoul, South Korea, the world belonged to Han-suk Kim. A 55-years-old titan of the criminal underground, his empire stretched from Busan harbors to Tokyo back alleys. Tech espionage, underground casinos, and fentanyl trafficking were his domain, but his most valuable possession was not gold, guns, or power, it was his only daughter, Ji-eun. At 24, Ji-eun was brilliance wrapped in silk and steel. Fluent in 5 languages, a black belt in taekwondo, and educated at elite universities, she seemed untouchable. But beneath her polished exterior lurked restlessness and rebellion. Her father had kept her away from the family's bloodier dealings, insisting she would run legitimate companies, tech, real estate, entertainment. Yet Ji-eun yearned to learn the world her father controlled in secret. She eavesdropped on meetings, practiced shooting at private ranges, and studied encrypted files on her father's laptop. Her black hair fell like midnight silk, her obsidian eyes never missing a detail, and her movements were precise, lethal, and graceful. Fate, cruel and patient, brought Kofi and Han-suk together over a shipment of rare earth minerals, neodymium, dysprosium, vital for electronics and weaponry. The deal was brokered in Singapore, a neutral ground where skyscrapers reflected ambition as much as greed. Kofi arrived with Kwame, his towering Ghanaian lieutenant, muscles like a baobab tree, loyal to the bone. Han-suk arrived flanked by his enforcers, silent men in black suits with tattoos creeping from beneath collars. The meeting was held in a private suite at Marina Bay Sands, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a glittering harbor. Kofi entered with confidence. "Mr. Kim," he said, his voice smooth, "it's an honor to partner with the Shadow Lotus. Together, we'll flood the markets and drown our competitors." Han-suk's gaze was ice. "Honor is earned, Mr. Adebayo. Deliver on time, and we'll discuss expansion. Fail, and failure has consequences." Negotiations dragged on, routes through the Indian Ocean, bribes, contingency plans against pirates, when Ji-eun slipped in. Officially delivering documents, she instead observed the room, her eyes immediately locking with Kofi's. In that instant, time paused. Kofi felt something he hadn't in years: electricity, raw and undeniable. Ji-eun's gaze was sharp yet curious, a fire he recognized in himself. Han-suk's voice shattered the tension. "Ji-eun, leave. Now." Her subtle smile as she left spoke volumes. Trouble had arrived. 2 weeks after the deal was sealed in Singapore, the operation moved into its most dangerous phase. At dawn, under a sky still bruised with night, the MV Endurance slipped out of Lagos Harbour. On paper, it was nothing more than a rust-streaked container ship transporting agricultural fertilizer to Southeast Asia. But buried deep beneath layers of paperwork and deception lay something far more valuable: rare earth minerals, tightly packed, coated, and insured with blood. From the bridge, the captain watched the shoreline fade. The city of Lagos, its noise, its chaos, its secrets, slowly disappeared into the haze. What remained was open water. And open water had no loyalty. Kofi Adebayo watched the ship's progress from a private office overlooking Apapa Port, Lagos' most dangerous artery. Multiple screens glowed in front of him. Shipping routes, satellite feeds, encrypted chat logs. His golden lion pendant rested against his chest, unmoving, but the man wearing it was anything but calm. This shipment was different. It wasn't just about money. It was about reputation. About proving to the Asian syndicates that Africa was no longer a secondary player in the global underworld. If this cargo failed to arrive, Kofi's rise would stall, or worse, collapse. And somewhere in the shadows, someone was already waiting. In a lawless coastal enclave far from official maps, a man known as Osei studied a satellite image of the Indian Ocean. His face was a roadmap of old violence, one eye slightly lower than the other, a long scar pulling his mouth into a permanent sneer. Osei had known Kofi long before tailored suits and private jets. They had once run the same streets. Once fought the same enemies. Until ambition split them apart. Kofi rose. Osei was left behind. Now, watching the blinking dot that represented the MV Endurance, Osei felt something old and poisonous coil in his chest. This was more than business. This was personal. He turned to the men around him, armed brokers, smugglers, intermediaries with no flags and no faces. The ship doesn't reach Asia, Osei said calmly. Not intact. Through a web of contacts, he had secured what he needed. Somali pirates, desperate, experienced, and willing. They didn't need to know the full value of the cargo. They just needed coordinates, timing, and silence. The sea would do the rest. Back in Lagos, Kofi sensed the shift before the first report arrived. Ship routes don't whisper, but networks do. A Ghanaian hacker named Tunde, part of Kofi's inner circle, intercepted chatter on an encrypted maritime channel. Short bursts. Fragmented. Enough to raise alarms. Kofi leaned forward. Talk to me. Tunde swallowed. There's movement along the Somali corridor. Not random. Coordinated. Kwame crossed his arms. Pirates. Not the usual kind, Tunde replied. These ones are being guided. Kofi exhaled slowly. Guided meant funded. Funded meant an enemy with reach. Before he could issue orders, his secure phone vibrated. South Korea. In Seoul, Han-suk Kim listened to his intelligence chief with cold focus. The words Yakuza interest changed everything. Rare earth minerals weren't just valuable, they were strategic. Whoever controlled them controlled supply chains, leverage, futures. The Yakuza didn't tolerate disruptions to balance, especially not from rising powers outside their sphere. Han-suk didn't hesitate. He called Kofi directly. The line connected after 2 rings. Adebayo, Han-suk said, his voice clipped, emotionless. My people tell me the Japanese are watching your shipment. Kofi straightened. Watching doesn't mean acting. It does when pirates suddenly gain funding, Han-suk replied. Any delay, any loss, and our alliance becomes a liability. The implication was clear. Deliver, or stand alone. The call ended without pleasantries. Kofi stared at the darkened screen, jaw tight. He had faced rivals, coups, and betrayals, but this was different. This wasn't street warfare. This was international chess. And brute force alone wouldn't win it. Night fell in Lagos. Rain hammered against the windows as Kofi sat alone, the city's glow flickering behind him. His mind raced through contingencies, armed escorts, diversion routes, decoys. Each option carried risk. Each move could escalate the situation beyond control. Then his burner phone vibrated. Unknown number. One message. I know about the pirates. Meet me in Bangkok. I can save your shipment. J. Kofi read it twice. Then a third time. Only one person in the world fit that initial. Silence filled the room. Kwame noticed immediately. Boss. Kofi didn't answer at first. His thoughts raced, not with fear, but calculation. Ji-eun Kim. The dragon's daughter. She shouldn't have known. And if she did, that meant she was far deeper into the underworld than her father believed, or wanted. Kwame frowned. That's dangerous territory. Kofi finally spoke. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned. So is the sea. He looked at the message again. Bangkok wasn't just a city, it was a crossroads, where spies vanished, where loyalties blurred, where truth was traded like currency. If Ji-eun was lying, he'd lose time. If she was telling the truth, she might be the only reason the MV Endurance survived the journey. Kofi stood, adjusting his cufflinks. Prepare the jet, he said. We are going to Thailand. Kofi arrived at a bar in Bangkok. Incense hung thick in the air, barely masking the smell of alcohol and old violence. Red lights washed over faces that had learned how to forget. Bass rolled through the floor like distant thunder. Kofi chose a seat with his back to the wall. He waited. From the corner of the room, a figure detached itself from the shadows. A hoodie, faded jeans, baseball cap pulled low. To anyone else, she was just another traveler hiding from a city. But Kofi recognized the posture immediately. Controlled, alert, dangerous. Ji-eun Kim slid into the booth across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. Kofi finally said, his voice low, steady. Does your father know you're here? Ji-eun lifted her head just enough for the light to catch her eyes. There was no fear in them. Only calculation, and something sharper. My father, she replied calmly, knows only what I allow him to know. Kofi stuttered her. This wasn't the sheltered daughter from Singapore. This was someone who had planned every step, anticipated every risk. She leaned forward. The pirates targeting your shipment, she continued, aren't acting alone. The money came through a Japanese shell network. Yakuza brokers. They want your minerals to destabilize the supply chain before it reaches Korea. Kofi didn't react outwardly, but inside, pieces clicked into place. This isn't theft, he said. It's sabotage. Ji-eun nodded. Exactly. The weight of her words settled between them. You could have told your father, Kofi said. Her lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. And be locked in another gilded room? No. I came to you. Why? Kofi asked. Ji-eun met his gaze without blinking. Because I'm tired of watching men decide my future like it's a business contract. Bangkok became their chessboard. By day, they moved separately, Kofi meeting contacts, rerouting communications, coordinating with his men at sea. Ji-eun disappeared into the digital underworld, hacking maritime databases, tracing payments, mapping pirate movements with surgical precision. By night, they met again. Different locations, different disguises, rooftop cafes, quiet riverside walkways, rooms where the walls had heard worse confessions than theirs. They talked. Not small talk. Not lies. Kofi spoke of Lagos, of nights where sleep meant weakness, of learning power the hard way, of burying friends before their dreams ever lived. He spoke of loneliness at the top, of how ruling meant never being honest with anyone. Ji-eun listened. Really listened. She spoke of Seoul, of expectations wrapped in silk, of being trained to smile while men decided wars behind closed doors, of learning to fight not because she wanted violence, but because she refused helplessness. Every conversation peeled back armor. Every shared silence tightened the tension. They were two weapons forged in different fires, and the closer they stood, the hotter the air became. Kwame noticed before Kofi admitted it. You're distracted, he said one night, watching the street from a hotel balcony. That girl, she's not just information. Kofi didn't deny it. She's a risk, Kwame continued. A beautiful one. But still a risk. She could be playing you. Kofi's expression didn't change. Everyone plays games in this world, he replied. The difference is knowing who's honest about it. Kwame sighed. This isn't strategy anymore. Kofi finally turned to him. A faint smile touched his lips. Lions don't fear dragons, he said. Kwame shook his head. Sometimes dragons burn the whole jungle. Kofi and Ji-eun stood at the balcony of her hotel in Patpong, neon lights flickering over rain-dark city. The noise of Bangkok faded into a distant hum. If my father knew I was here, Ji-eun said quietly, he'd call it betrayal. Kofi stuttered her. And yet you came. She met his eyes. No one ever asks what I want. Kofi exhaled. Wanting something doesn't make it safe. I don't want safe, she replied. Silence stretched between them. "You trust me," she said. "In my world, trust gets people killed," Kofi answered. "But I listen to you." "Why?" she asked. "Because you don't look at me like a weapon," he said. "And I don't see you as someone's shadow." There was a long pause between them as they looked deep into each other's eyes, unable to hold the fire that brewed within them. Ji-eun stepped closer. "If we cross this, there's no pretending it's just business." Kofi nodded. "I know." She didn't step away. Their lips met, slow, deliberate, not rushed, not innocent. A choice, not a mistake. When they parted, she whispered, "This changes everything." Kofi answered calmly, "It always does." They turned back toward the city, knowing the line was crossed, and nothing ahead would be clean again. The attack came just before dawn. Off the Somali coast, where the ocean stretched dark and lawless, fast boats cut through the water like blades. The MV Endurance shuddered as warning shots cracked across the night, tracer fire streaking low over the waves. Pirates. But these weren't desperate amateurs. They moved with coordination, angles tight, timing precise. Someone had trained them. Someone had paid well. On board, Kofi's security team reacted instantly. Floodlights snapped on. Engines roared. The sea exploded into noise. Gunfire tore through the darkness as pirates tried to board. Kofi's men countered hard, returning fire, using the ship's height and cover. The smell of fuel and salt mixed with smoke as the first pirate vessel veered off, disabled. Then the second wave hit. Explosions flashed across the horizon as RPGs lit up the water, briefly turning night into day. Chaos ruled, metal screaming, waves churning, men shouting over the storm of sound. Kwame fought through it all, ignoring the pain when a round slammed into his vest, knocking him back. He got up anyway, planting himself between the bridge and the attackers, firing with calm precision. Using Ji-eun's intel, Kofi anticipated their final move, the flanking boats meant to cut off escape. He ordered a sudden maneuver. The Endurance shifted course sharply, forcing the pirates into open water. It was over quickly after that. Outmatched, outplayed, the attackers scattered. Some boats burned. Others drifted helplessly as the ocean reclaimed them. Osei's men vanished into the waves, their ambition ending far from land or mercy. When silence finally returned, the sea looked the same as it always had, dark, endless, indifferent. The MV Endurance continued east. Days later, the ship docked in Busan Harbor, untouched where it mattered. The cargo was intact. The message was clear. Kofi Adebayo delivered. In Seoul, Han-suk Kim received the news with quiet approval. Soon after, the invitation came. "You've proven yourself," Han-suk said. "Come to Seoul. We'll talk expansion." Kofi agreed. But as the city lights of Busan reflected off the water, his thoughts weren't on contracts or territory. They were on Ji-eun. Because some victories didn't feel complete without the person who made them possible. And he knew this was only the beginning. Seoul became their secret. Kofi moved through the city under aliases and caution, but whenever Ji-eun was near, the weight of the underworld seemed to loosen its grip. They met when no one expected them to be, hidden Hanok houses tucked behind wooden gates, where lantern light glowed softly and history whispered through paper walls. On rooftops overlooking Namsan Tower, they stood side by side, watching the city stretch endlessly beneath them, alive and unaware. In those stolen hours, they were almost normal. Ji-eun introduced Kofi to Seoul beyond boardrooms and syndicates. Late-night street stalls where steam rose from metal pots, where she laughed as he struggled with spicy rice cakes and teased him for reaching too quickly for water. She showed him how to eat slowly, how to respect the burn. Kofi, in return, brought her into his world, not the violence, but the rhythm. Underground clubs where Afrobeat pulsed through the floor, where she learned to move without counting steps, letting the music guide her instead of discipline. For the first time, she danced without permission. Their bond deepened quietly. No promises. No talk of the future. Just understanding. Because they both knew, nothing this fragile survived daylight for long. It was inevitable. Power always notices what threatens it. Han-suk's network was vast, his eyes everywhere. A whispered report. A blurred photo. Two figures standing too close in a Hanok courtyard. It was enough. The confrontation came without warning. Ji-eun was summoned before dawn, the air inside the family compound cold and still. Her father stood waiting, his expression carved from stone. "You betray me," Han-suk said flatly. "With that African upstart." Ji-eun didn't flinch. "He is not what you think," she replied. Han-suk's voice rose, sharp and dangerous. "By morning, he will be fish food. This ends now." For the first time in her life, Ji-eun did not bow her head. "I love him." The words struck harder than any weapon. Han-suk stared at her for a long moment. Not just anger, something else flickered there. Disappointment. Then his face hardened. "Love," he said coldly, "is a weakness I won't allow." By nightfall, Ji-eun was gone. Removed from Seoul and taken to Jeju Island, to a compound built for isolation and control. Cameras. Armed guards. The ocean on all sides, endless and unforgiving. A fortress disguised as protection. As the gates closed behind her, Ji-eun understood the truth her father would never say aloud. This wasn't punishment. It was containment. And somewhere far away, Kofi Adebayo would soon learn that the city he thought had given him peace had quietly declared war. The moment Kofi learned Ji-eun had vanished, restraint died. Jeju Island wasn't just a location. It was a message. Isolation. Control. A warning. Kofi didn't argue with it. He answered it. Within 48 hours, the operation was set. Nigerian enforcers hardened by street wars, Ghanaian tech specialists who could blind cameras and reroute alarms, and former Somali pirates who knew how to move silently where escape depended on timing, not mercy. They entered South Korea as businessmen, tourists, technicians. Different names. Clean papers. No patterns. By the time they crossed to Jeju, the plan was already in motion. The compound sat against the coastline like a scar. High walls, layered security, the ocean behind it offering no escape. Floodlights swept the perimeter in slow, confident arcs. Confidence breeds mistakes. Under moonlight, Kofi's team moved. Walls were scaled with practiced ease. Cameras went dark one by one. Silence shots cracked softly in the night, precise and final. Alarm screamed seconds later, delayed, but inevitable. Kofi pushed forward through narrow corridors, heart steady, mind locked. Every step brought him closer to the one thing Han-suk had taken too far. He found Ji-eun in a secured room, hands clenched, eyes burning brighter than fear. "Kofi," she breathed, disbelief breaking through her composure. He pulled her into him briefly, just enough to know she was real. "Time to go, my queen," he said. She nodded once. "I'm ready." They emerged into the open courtyard, and the trap closed. Floodlights snapped on, blinding and absolute. Han-suk stood at the far end, weapon raised, his expression unreadable. Around him, armed men moved into position. Then more shadows appeared. Osei. And with him, Yakuza reinforcements, drawn by greed and old vendettas. The night shattered. Gunfire echoed. The courtyard became chaos, shouts, bodies dropping behind cover. Kwame took a hit and staggered but refused to fall, planting himself between Kofi and incoming fire. "Move," he yelled, forcing the enemy back. Ji-eun moved with him now, not behind him. She grabbed a fallen weapon, steady hands, sharp focus. She didn't hesitate. She didn't miss. Then Osei lunged from the side, blade flashing. For a heartbeat, it looked over. Ji-eun moved first. She drove forward, striking from behind. Osei fell, his long rivalry ending in silence. The courtyard froze. Han-suk stared at his daughter, not as a possession now, but as something he could no longer control. The battle burned itself out as quickly as it began. Survivors fled. Sirens wailed in the distance. Kofi took Ji-eun's hand. They didn't look back. Because some lines, once crossed, erase everything behind them. By the time the gunfire faded, the war had chosen its ending. Osei lay motionless in the courtyard, his long pursuit of revenge finally silenced. The Yakuza forces melted back into the night, blooded and unwilling to die for someone else's ambition. And Han-suk Kim, once untouchable, stood wounded, supported by stone and pride alone. Ji-eun met her father's gaze one last time. There were no apologies. No promises. Just understanding. Kofi took her hand, and together they vanished into the night. They didn't linger. From Jeju, they moved fast, false routes, rotating safe houses, no digital footprints. Busan became a brief refuge, its port swallowing them among containers and cargo ships. From there, Thailand offered distance and chaos, a place where empires could be rebuilt quietly. Kofi's African networks adapted quickly, resilient and battle-tested. Ji-eun brought precision, financial discipline, intelligent structuring, clean fronts. Where Kofi ruled through instinct and presence, Ji-eun ruled through foresight and strategy. They didn't just survive. They evolved. Their empire no longer belonged to one continent. African supply chains fused with Asian logistics. Smuggling routes became systems. Violence became calculated, not reckless. Loyalty was rewarded. Ji-eun was no longer a protected daughter or hidden asset. She was a queen. Partners spoke to her with respect. Enemies learned her patience was more dangerous than Kofi's fury. Together, they balanced each other, fire and control, instinct and intelligence. Yet power never comes without cost. Years passed, and they did more than survive. They conquered. They built an empire from blood, loyalty, and vision, until their names became a household force in the underworld, spoken with fear, respect, and awe. He was the lion who refused to bow. She was the dragon's daughter who chose her own throne. Together, they ruled not just territory, but destiny. In the underworld, their names became legend. Not because they were ruthless, but because they survived. If you enjoyed this story, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Would you risk everything for love, knowing the world would come for you?